In the fall of 1880, when the Montana Territory still existed more in imagination than in maps, when roads were nothing but wagon scars and autumn winds traveled farther than people did, a lonely wooden cabin stood quietly on Briar Ridge, a slope where the grass bent like memory itself, and the air carried the kind of silence that felt older than time. This is where Samuel Hart and his wife Eleanor Hart came, pulling behind them a wagon loaded with more sorrow than belongings. 2 winters earlier, they had lost their young daughter, and in the crowded towns every sound, every familiar corner, every lantern glow hurt like a reminder. Grief smothered them. The doctor told them to get fresh country air, as if air alone could fix what time hadn't. But they weren't chasing air. Not really. They wanted to vanish. They wanted a place that didn't know their story. And yet, Briar Ridge had stories of its own. The first evening in the cabin carried a strange kind of quiet, too clean, too sharp, as if the ridge was listening back. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the field blur under the dying orange sunlight. The ridge was empty, untouched, and yet she felt watched by the weight of what once lived there. "Sam," she said softly, "it feels like someone lived an entire lifetime here before we ever arrived." Samuel, kneeling to fix the floorboards, gave a tired half-smile. "Every place has a story, Ellie. We're just passing through its pages."
But that night, something broke the silence. Eleanor woke to a sound, soft, slow, rhythmic. Tap. Scrape. Tap. It came from beneath the cabin floor. Not like a mouse. Not like shifting wood. More deliberate. More human. Like someone sliding a lantern across a wooden floor. Right underneath them. Samuel lit a match and checked every corner, even stepped outside under the moonlight to listen. But the ridge was silent again. The sound stopped. Still, every night afterward, at the same hour, the tapping returned. Never rushed, never loud. Just the same patient rhythm, as if someone below was reminding them they were not alone. Days passed slowly, and the emptiness of the ridge weighed on Eleanor. She spent mornings on the porch with a quilt over her knees, afternoons arranging the little kitchen, evenings sitting quietly by the window, waiting for night to fall. Samuel busied himself with repairs, shingles, walls, fences, anything to keep his hands from remembering loss.
Days passed slowly, and the emptiness of the ridge weighed on Eleanor. She spent mornings on the porch with a quilt over her knees, afternoons arranging the little kitchen, evenings sitting quietly by the window, waiting for night to fall. Samuel busied himself with repairs, shingles, walls, fences, anything to keep his hands from remembering loss. But one morning, while repairing the north wall, Samuel's hammer struck something hollow. He paused, listened, then pried off the wooden plank. Behind it, encased in dust and decades, was an old wooden trunk that looked as though someone had hidden it intentionally. Inside were 3 items: a torn canvas journal, a small brass key, and a lantern, its glass cracked, black soot still clinging to its corners. Eleanor reached for the lantern immediately. "Sam," she whispered, "it feels warm." Samuel frowned. The lantern had no fuel, no fire, no reason to be warm. He opened the journal, its pages brittle with age. The first line read, "My name is Margaret Briar. I live alone beneath this ridge." Beneath. A word that hung in the air like breath turning cold. Eleanor's eyes widened. Samuel whispered, "There's nothing beneath us." But they both knew the tapping disagreed. That evening, at the edge of dusk, Samuel was ploughing a small patch of land behind the cabin. The sky was the color of rusted copper. and the wind had a warmth that didn't match autumn. Eleanor sat on the porch with the cracked lantern beside her. As the last light faded, she heard it. A woman's whisper riding the wind. "Leave the lantern lit. Please." She froze. She looked across the empty fields. No one. When Samuel returned, she told him exactly what she heard. His jaw tightened, but he didn't doubt her. Not out here, not after the tapping, not after the journal. 3 days later, Samuel began digging around the cabin's foundation. Something beneath them needed answering. After an hour of digging, his shovel struck something solid. Wooden beams buried deep. It was too structured, too intentional to be random. Clearing the dirt away, he uncovered a buried door, old but heavy, sealed by time. When he lifted it, a rush of cold air spilled out. It wasn't the smell of death or mold, just old, untouched air, stored for decades. A staircase descended into the earth. Eleanor held the lantern, Samuel held the brass key. Together they stepped down. The underground room was long and narrow, carved into the earth by steady hands. Samuel imagined someone living here for years, seeing the world through soil and wood. There was a small iron bed, a table with sewing tools, a mirror cracked straight through the middle. But at the far wall stood another door with a brass plate. The key clicked perfectly. Beyond it lay a second room, larger, warmer somehow, as though memory still lived there. Shelves held jars of herbs, dried roots, and old medicines. A rocking chair sat slightly turned, as if someone had left in the middle of sitting. A quilt lay half-finished on a nearby stand. And on the desk, letters wrapped in faded ribbon waited for hands that had never come back. Eleanor opened the first letter slowly. "To the next soul who finds my lantern, know that I stay below because the world above forgets too easily." Another letter read, "I waited for someone who could hear me." Samuel stepped backward. "She lived under our feet," he whispered. Eleanor lifted the lantern closer. The flame inside flickered, oddly bright, almost like recognition. It wasn't warm from fuel. It was warm like a memory being touched. At the end of the journal was a final entry. "If the lantern grows warm, it means I'm near." Eleanor touched the lantern again. Warm, alive, comforting. "Ellie," Samuel murmured, "maybe she's not trying to scare us." Eleanor nodded slowly. "She just doesn't want to disappear." Just then the tapping returned, but this time it was behind the far wall of the second room. Slow, soft, patient, as if someone knew they finally understood. Eleanor raised the lantern toward the sound. The flame brightened into a gentle gold, then steadied into calm light. The tapping stopped forever. On the desk, under the ribboned letters, Eleanor discovered one more. Unfinished. The ink dried mid-sentence like the writer had been interrupted. "If someone ever reads this, tell them I wasn't trying to..." The rest was blank. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair, lantern glowing gently on her lap. Samuel stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. She whispered into the golden glow, "It's all right. We hear you." The lantern's flame fluttered softly, like a final exhale of a soul finally remembered. The underground room warmed. The ridge above grew still, and when Samuel and Eleanor returned to the cabin, the tapping never returned. Briar Ridge slept peacefully, for the first time since 1880. And for those who wander through forgotten stories, for those who listen to the whispers of old America and the people time left behind, subscribe. There are still many ridges, many cabins, and many memories waiting in the dark.